In 1989, a young man stumbled upon a century-old secret, a safe that remained tucked away and forgotten. The contents of that safe would contain a novel, with pages filled with predictions so chillingly accurate they could only be described as a blueprint for the future. The young man was a direct descendant of the famous 19th century novelist Jules Verne. Jules Verne had been obsessed with his ancestor's safe since childhood. Everyone thought it was empty, but in my imagination, it was full of precious stones, gold, and fabulous jewels, and strange objects given to or collected by my great-grandfather. It didn't, of course, contain a cache of gems or gold, but among other literary fragments, it did contain a manuscript for an unpublished novel drafted in 1863, Paris in the 20th century. The manuscript's existence, concealed for over a century, contained predictions describing a world of glass skyscrapers, high-speed trains, gas-powered automobiles, calculators, a worldwide communications network, and much more, often considered one of the most accurate books with predictions of the future. Ever since the dawn of civilization, humans have always been obsessed with predicting the future. From the ancient practices of divination to the modern science of statistics, we have always sought to understand and control the future. We can't help but wonder, what's coming down the road? What will we miss? For one person, Jules Verne, often described as the father of science fiction, his obsession with the future churned out a successful career as a novelist, poet, playwright, and, as it turns out, a seer. Verne accurately predicted the invention of, and many details about, the submarine in his book 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. His story, in the year 2889, presaged television news. But no other work of his, at least in terms of accurate predictions, compared to his lost novel, Paris in the 20th century. The reason it had been lost for over a century was because of his publisher, Pierre-Jules Hetzel, who was hesitant about the book and rejected it, believing, in this piece there is not a single issue concerning the real future that is properly resolved, no critique that hasn't already been made and remade before. In a letter he wrote to Verne, Pierre expressed his dissatisfaction with the piece. "I was not expecting perfection. To repeat, I knew that you were attempting the impossible, but I was hoping for something better. It is lackluster and lifeless. I am truly sorry to have to tell you this, but I believe that publishing this would be a disaster for your reputation. You are not ready to write a book like this. Wait 20 years and then try it again." And if Verne had tried it again 20 years later, it is no doubt that it would have been a massive success, as in those years there was a relentless obsession for utopian fiction. Unfortunately, he had forgotten about the piece and left it to rot in his safe for 100 years or so until his great-grandson uncovered it, and it went on to be published in 1994 to critical acclaim. The story is set in the Paris of the 1960s and concerns a 16-year-old Michel Dufresnoy who graduates with a devotion to literature and the classics, but finds they have been forgotten in a futuristic world where only technological writing is favored. Dufresnoy's alienation is in fact inspired by Verne's own situation. At the time, to support his family, he was writing in the mornings before spending his days working at the Paris stock market, which he hated. Dufresnoy determines to be an artist working on his own, but finds that his book of poetry is impossible to sell, and soon he is starving in the winter's cold, one of the few forces of nature that science has yet to overcome. In despair, he sends his last dollars to buy violets for his beloved, but finds that she has disappeared from her apartment, evicted when her father lost his job as the university's last teacher of rhetoric. In a moving but excessively melodramatic climax, the heartbroken Dufresnoy, deprived of his friends and loved ones, wanders through the frozen, mechanized, electrical wonders of Paris. The subjectivity becomes steadily more surreal as the dying artist, in the final paroxysm of despair, unconsciously circles an old cemetery. Dufresnoy encounters the modern tool of criminal execution, the electric chair, before freezing to death. Verne's portrait of the 1960s Paris features, among other things, gasoline-powered cars crowding the streets, fax machines, and an internet system of communications, weapons of mass destruction, electronic music, an educational focus on tech instead of the humanities, and climate change-caused displacement. Virtually every page is crowded with evidence of Verne's ability to forecast the science and life of the future, from feminism to the rise of illegitimate births, from emails to burglar alarms, from the growth of suburbs to mass-produced higher education, including the dissolution of humanities departments. This novel, however, shows Verne in a darker, frankly dystopian mood. His mid-20th century Paris is an enormously wealthy society, a place of technological wonders, but it is also a society without meaningful art. Engineering and banking are the prime industries of this civilization, and as the book's protagonist discovers, not even the most talented poet can find a place for himself. The Paris in which Verne imagines is also dominated by capitalism and money, a world where there is no longer any room for the arts, where everyone is literate but doesn't read, and music has continued to decline. The protagonist is unhappy in this society and is not able to support himself and his partner because literature and art are simply not appreciated in this world. Life, as imagined by Verne, is nothing more than a gigantic marketplace where people no longer fight over ideas but only for riches. And although this novel is filled with predictions of the future, it is its critique on society as a whole that made it as compelling as it was. And perhaps his most accurate prediction is the way society would turn out, dominated by capitalism and technological advancement. And although we live in a world where things like art and literature are still appreciated, the question arises, how much longer do we have until technology completely makes it obsolete? With the rise of artificial intelligence, art is beginning to lose its value. And although this novel didn't predict AI, it did have a discourse on the rise of technology and rendering art valueless. Could Verne have been alluding to AI? Or perhaps it was capitalism and how society chases a utilitarian society on the basis of financial and industrial progress rather than the arts. This novel not only predicts the inventions of mankind, but it paints a future tainted by consumerism and technology, a society that mirrors our own. And although we may be far away from AI rendering art useless, it is still a thought lingering in the back of our minds. With the way AI can generate lifelike videos with the click of a button, or whip up short stories and novels, we are slowly approaching the point where technology replaces creativity. And Jules Verne foresaw that future over 100 years ago.